Would you please check your ideas and opinions at the door? All your philosophical and religious views, all your logic, because I say check it at the door advisedly because you can pick it up again when you go out if you feel unsafe without it. I'm not trying to argue you out of your opinions and views. I'm merely suggesting that for the sake of an experiment, you temporarily suspend them.
Hello and welcome to the Philosophical Minds podcast, an exploration of all things philosophical, alchemical, and esoteric, from the psycho-spiritual to the material-chemical nature of the all. Join me and my guests as we inquire into the liminality of mind and matter, and tend to the fertile soils of awareness and perception while facilitating an expanded consciousness from the individual to the collective. If you enjoy the show and find it of value, consider supporting and becoming a patron via the Patreon at patreon.com/philosophicalminds. A small contribution makes a big difference and definitely makes it easier for me to continue the show, although I will always do my best to keep it flowing regardless. Thank you all, and let's get into it.
Great.
All right, I'm joined this evening with Dr. Marguerete rigoglioso out of Massachusetts. She holds a PhD in humanities, an MA in philosophy and religion from the California Institute of Integral Studies, and an AB in psychology from Vassar College with high honors. She is currently the foremost authority on the history of virgin birth and has taught graduate and undergraduate courses in both the United States and the United Kingdom. She's the founding director of Seven Sisters Mystery School. She's taught courses in religion, humanities, and women's spirituality at various colleges and universities, including Dominican University of California, the California Institute of Integral Studies, Sonoma State University, and Sophia University. She's the author of The Cults of Devine Birth in Ancient Greece and Virgin Mother Goddesses of Antiquity. And I can go on, but her latest work is The Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception, where she digs into the history of Mother Mary. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that, especially. It's a pleasure to have you here, Margaret. Is there anything else that you would like to add about yourself or your background additionally for the listeners before we get started?
Thank you so much for having me, Sky. And just my first name is actually pronounced Marguerite. So just to let you know, it's like the drink without the A.
I got the last name correct. I didn't get the first name. My apologies on that.
Well, now you've got it. No problem.
Is that Italian? Is that what that is?
No, the last name is Italian,
Okay.
but the first name is French. I'm not sure exactly what inspired my parents to give me a French name, since we are Italian. All four of my grandparents were Italian, but there we have it.
Interesting. Well, this is really cool. I love individuals like you because you're very academic, but also very spiritual. So it's a really beautiful combination. It's kind of what I strive for, and I love talking to individuals like that. So yeah, I guess I have questions to start. Couple questions up front.
Sure.
In regards to the whole subject of virgin birth or immaculate conception, what got you so passionate about diving into this subject, for one, and then maybe after that you could touch a little bit on like the general premise of your book and what are some of the key points and messages that you're trying to convey to people?
Sure, great. Also, I hope we'll have time to talk about Mary Magdalene and my work with her in my upcoming course, because some of your listeners, viewers might be interested in that. So in this lifetime, my interest in divine birth emerged out of research I was doing to decide what my doctoral dissertation was going to be. And I knew that I wanted to do a dissertation on priestesses of the ancient Greco-Roman world. And so prior to that, I had received kind of, when I was writing my master's thesis on Demeter and Persephone in Italy and Greece, I had just received sort of an intuitive flash that the Demeter and Persephone mother-daughter story was talking about divine birth and without any males involved, and that this was an actual practice of women. Okay. So that just came as this intuitive downpour one day in 2001. And then fast forward to 2003, when I was starting to research all the references to priestesses of ancient Greece. I had that rolling around in the back of my mind. And so when I started looking at the Greek material, I started seeing what looked to me like evidence that divine birth was actually something that these historical and mythological and legendary priestesses were practicing. And I just started receiving boatloads of information in books and things like that. And I realized, okay, this is what I have to focus my dissertation on, because no one has ever written anything about this. And of course, Mother Mary figures into it, because she's the one that we most famously know of as the person who achieved divine conception. But I didn't know that it was going on all throughout the ancient Mediterranean world until I started researching it. And it's actually gone on throughout the entire globe. So that is what got me into it. I got sort of the whole context about Mother Mary from the ancient Mediterranean world and West Asia. And so then when I was able to look into Mary's gospel, her infancy gospel, and that talks about how she was born divinely of her mother and how she was raised to be a priestess of this nature and how she gave birth to Jesus, I was able to decode it and say, oh, now I get all the details of how this process, this practice worked. And that's what I wrote about in The Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception.
Wow. Well, it's definitely a fascinating subject, so I'm glad that you're out there talking about it. So I guess in regards to some of that particular convincing evidence that you came across within these traditions in the ancient Mediterranean and or Greece or West Asia, maybe you can speak a little bit about some of the things in particular in regards to those places or documents or papers that you've come across that gave you some really compelling insight into this whole thing.
Right. Well, first of all, like if we just look at some historical figures like Plato, Pythagoras, and Alexander the Great. So those are, we can all agree they lived, they walked the planet, and their biographers talk about the fact that they were divinely conceived by their mothers. There are these stories of how this happened. If we look in the ancient Egyptian tradition, the pharaohs are said to have been born in this way. Divine birth, divine conception, that's historically documented as well. So I started going backward into the legends. We couldn't exactly prove, did these people live, didn't they? And then the myths, which go even further back. But I think they are also talking about histories, both of these things. And there was just so much. There were priestesses, all the stories about the rapes of the maidens by the gods. What I understood was that was like a latter day degenerated, hijacked version of divine birth, where these astral entities were coming in and taking over the women in their practices, essentially rape seducing them, when in fact, the original practice of these women was what we would call parthenogenesis or self-conception, virgin birth. So there are just many, many details that I find about all of this, and I've documented it in the two books you mentioned, The Cult of Divine Birth in Ancient Greece and then virgin mother goddesses of antiquity. And I show how it was basically at the foundation of so much of ancient Greek culture, including things like the Eleusinian mysteries and other things like that, that at core, at base, there were divine birth rituals that were part of these great rites.
So I guess when you say divine birth, maybe we can be a little bit specific about what that means. It may mean a few different things. So I believe there are some practices in regards to ushering in souls in alignment with maybe particular astrological elections to usher in a particular soul archetype. But then maybe this is more of, when you're saying divine birth, are you speaking of essentially birth without the insemination or without the utilization of male semen in this regard? Or maybe you could speak a little bit about specifically divine birth.
Yeah, that's a great and important question. What I found in my research was that there were stages of divine birth. And basically, the earliest stage was conception without male sperm or male interactivity of any kind. And that as this practice devolved, as patriarchy grew and became stronger, first of all, the astral beings, on the other side of the veil that were male, would start inserting themselves into these virgin conception practices, again, like rape, seducing, or invading. It's like, let's say this woman was in a high altered state of consciousness, which is what would have to be the case in order to do this. And all of a sudden, whoa, she thinks she's working quantum level with her eggs and everything. And boom, a male god comes in and he's like, hey, let me have sex with you, or better yet, let me just rape you. And so the woman, the conception of the child would be different in that case. Okay. And then as that went along, the women started acquiescing to it. Like at first, the stories tell us that they resisted it. Then they started acquiescing and participating. So that's where you have people like Olympias, the mother of Alexander the Great. It seems that she was willingly participating in a divine birth conception with an astral god. And then you have the next, stage after that, which is the priestesses having sex with the male priests or kings, who then became the stand-ins for the gods, but literally were having sexual relations with these women. And it was like a kind of a high tantra. So it was still thought to be a divine conception because the male god the male priest was now embodying the god, but the quality of the child would be, a divine level type thing. But it had come a long way from where the woman was able to just be the male female herself and conceive. All right. So there was a devolvement of this practice over time.
And do you think that had anything to do with the biblical notion of like the sons of God giving birth to the daughters of man, or however that goes? Or do you see that as kind of a different thing?
Yes, it was very much related to it. The astral beings, the giants, the watchers, whatever you want to call them, the Anunnaki, the reptilians, they got wind of this practice of the women. And also, even if they were not getting involved in the divine birth rites, they were seeing the human women and deciding that they wanted to have sex with them on whatever level that takes place. And they would impregnate them. And so the sons of God, the watchers, whoever, the Nephilim, inserted themselves literally into these women. And then the women gave birth to these giants on the earth, the Nephilim, or whatever you want to call them. So it's all part of a continuum. And I would say that even if any of your viewers are interested in, the alien abduction phenomenon, this is on the trajectory of that. It's an unbidden use of a woman's womb and impregnation of her.
So
That's going very far from sovereignty of virgin birth to abduction, and women don't even know this is happening.
Yeah.
And everything in between.
Yeah, I was going to say that kind of sparked a couple questions, and one would be, were there any sort of protective methods that these women were able to deploy against these sort of astral interferences within their sort of practice? And then my other question, I guess, would be, did these higher beings, why did they stop, or did they stop, and are they continuing to do this thing? And then if so, what would you say is some modern day examples of that?
Right. Well, I would say the women initially, the priestesses, did try their darndest to create protections. There are various means of working on the interdimensional levels and creating protections through use of light or calling in protector beings. Using astrological timing that's more favorable. Those are some of the things I would imagine. I don't see descriptions of all that, but what I do see is just the invasions of the space by the women. I think it became so forceful after a while that no matter what they did, they were not able to withstand it. And also they would be tricked. So these gods would appear as different things so that the women would kind of think, oh, I'm in alignment with what I'm doing, like the shower of light with Zeus, or shape-shifting. And then the women thought they were safe. And then they would realize, oh my gosh, I'm being invaded. I'm being impregnated by this being. And so, this thing, my understanding is that this went down even into the royal lines in historical times, that by that time it was very much hijacked, that the last sort of legitimate attempts at divine birth with a positive intention was the Age of Avalon with Arthur and Guinevere. But even that, you can tell in the stories, and I've taught courses about this, it went awry. They were being attacked. They weren't able to have the sacred marriage that they wanted to. And so they were not able to continue their lineage on Earth as they had planned, because the idea is that the purpose is to bring in a higher vibrational holy level being who can help the planet, who can be the leader. That was supposed to be the original intention of these divine children. They would be the leaders. They would be the sacred leaders and the political leaders. But after the debacle of Arthur and Guinevere, all the royal lines got totally corrupted, and the women became forcibly impregnated or impregnated through rituals that were nefarious, negative. And some would say this has gone on all the way into contemporary times with certain royal lineages that shall remain nameless right at the moment. Yeah. So I do know of women who claim to have divinely conceived. I do know of that in a clear and clean way. And their children have met various fates. Okay, so I think that, and then of course, there's the whole swath of women who are alien abducted, don't even know that it's happening. Their children are being used on planet, off planet, whatever, for various interdimensional genetic experimentation and so forth. And so what's happening now is the veils are lifting off our eyes that divine birth can be a real thing, that abduction can be a real thing, that hijacking of this can be a real thing. And therefore, wow, women need to reclaim this power and clean this up and say no to the unwanted interference.
And would you say that the idea behind these sort of interferences in particular with particular bloodlines is that specifically for the reason that uh they want to birth these souls into those bloodlines for power seeking purposes in your estimation, or what's the reasoning behind that versus maybe just any everyday regular individual?
Yeah, they want to impregnate the spawn of the archons, the negative ones, onto the earth plane. And apparently, from my understanding, have been doing that for quite some time through negative magical ritual, which invokes certain energies to incarnate into the woman. And then they have these lineages continue, and they become the ruling forces on the planet. And that's what we're starting to awaken to. What is the thing about these bloodlines? They're not just like, human bloodlines. They're interdimensional force bloodlines.
And do you think that...
And that's why they're so powerful.
I was going to ask, do you think that when some of these souls are born into these bloodlines from these methods and these ways, are they themselves aware of where they came from? And what would you say their whole overall energy is like? Would you say it's a negative, malefic type energy or soul about them, or are some of them unaware, or what would you say about that?
I would imagine there are some who are taught and shown who they are, and that they have various powers because of that, or they will be supported by various powers because of that. There may be others who are not 100% conscious of what's going on, and they may be in like the lower dimensional strata of these families and so forth. They can more be manipulated and so forth. That's what I would surmise. That's what I pick up on intuitively.
Yeah. All right. Okay, now bouncing back to like the Gospel of Mary, or I think you said Mary's infancy gospel. I'm curious where this comes from, because I know that there's a Gnostic Christian gospel of Mary that comes from, I think, the Berlin Gnostic Codex, which I think it contains the Gospel of Mary as well as the Sophia of Christ and then the Secret Book of John. But is that the one that you're referencing in particular?
So those are all different documents. The one that I'm referencing is called the Infancy Gospel of James. However, originally it was called Birth of Mary. This is a gospel that the Christian church threw on the rubbish heap, decided that it wasn't a real gospel, because it was, inconvenient and threatening, because it told about the divine birth of Mary by her mother Anne, the divine birth of Jesus by Mary, her training and all that. And then there are these other gospels you're talking about, Gnostic gospels. The Gospel of Mary, a separate gospel, is known to be, it's called Gnostic. It's known to be the one whose main character is Mary Magdalene, who receives special direct esoteric teachings from Jesus that she shares with the apostles. So all of these things are different types of documents, but the one about Mother Mary is the Infancy Gospel of James or / Birth of Mary.
Yeah. And then so with the Infancy Gospel of James or / the Birth of Mary, what's some of maybe the historical background behind the origins of these documents? And then I guess it was essentially occulted or hidden. And after, I would ask also, what's your assessment of why that was?
Right. This gospel is said to have been written just after the crucifixion, basically, by someone named James, who probably, when you study it, was the son of Joseph, who became assigned as the guardian to Mary, but wasn't the biological father of Jesus. So therefore, this James was kind of like a stepbrother of Jesus, but it was, by Joseph, the guardian father from a previous companion to Mary. He was assigned guardianship, a kind of marriage, but it's really a protectorship of Mary when she was anywhere between 12 and 15 years old. And that's part of what's described in here. And so you can cross-reference this name James with the children of Joseph and or stepchildren of Mother Mary in the canonical Gospels, okay? And what this James says at the very end is that, these have been such trying times, I've had to go into hiding in order to write this. And so somehow, this gospel survived. It could have been written in the 2nd century of the Common Era, or really earlier. I mean, if indeed this James is a contemporary of Jesus, and he was there when Mother Mary came into the fold of Joseph, he would have been an eyewitness to all of these things. So in a sense, this could be one of the first and earliest Gospels. Now, the Catholic Church disputes that, and some scholars dispute it based on textual style reasons or whatever. But because I was able to come at it from the codes of divine birth, I realized, wow, these codes are nothing that anyone who wasn't deeply initiated or privy to this information at the time would have known. So I think that it is an authentic early document. And some of these other Gospels, they either went missing and then showed up in the Nag Hammadi library in 1943 or whatever, whenever it was. Or they were kind of around, but the Catholic Church rejected them, as I said. Or there may have been others that just got out and out burned that we don't even know about.
Yeah. And
maybe we were just dealing with these shards.
Yeah. Could you speak a little bit to what you mean when you say the codes of divine birth?
When I did all the research on divine birth in ancient Greece, I knew what certain things meant and what they symbolized and signified. So when I looked at Mary's infancy gospel, I was like, oh my gosh, I know why they call her a dove. I know why the virgins were coming to her, and I know what they were doing with her. I know all these little details I was able to decipher and pull out, write out the story of what was actually happening. And that's the substance of the mystery tradition of miraculous conception, is that unfolding of it all. Like I could take paragraphs to describe one word because I'm able to understand what that means in the context of the ancient Mediterranean world and Western Asia at the time.
Yeah. Sounds like you had eyes to see and ears to hear, perhaps. So with Mary's infancy gospel, is this text these days, is it something accessible? Do they keep it in any particular library? And then what was the original language that it was written in? Maybe any more details?
Yes. It is accessible. You can find it online. I think a particularly good translation of it is by Ronald Hawk. And his book is The Infancy Gospel of James and John, I think. I think there's another one that he looks at. He's got a translation. The original Greek is in there. And then he's got a translation into English. And he cross-references various versions of the manuscript that are found, some of which have little shards that are not in the others, right? So he tries to compile like a holistic one. And that's the one that I used, and it's the one that's translated and in the appendix of my book, The Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception.
And okay, so now I want to kind of get in
But
a little bit.
these things are available.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No problem.
I wanted to get in a little bit to the background of like the training or the methods, like what was this whole traditional, this tradition of ushering in these births like what did it entail, and what were some of these practices of how they were going about doing this in terms of the way of doing it with a healthy intention and like a clean way, so to speak.
Positive, yeah. I'll name a few things and then readers can go and take a look. It involved getting into a deep altered state of consciousness, altered and open. That may have involved sacred medicines, or it may have just been that the women were so open and able and ready to go into that themselves that they could do it under special circumstances, timing, and so forth. But it seems that an altered state of consciousness was necessary. It seems also that a level of virginity was necessary, a celibacy, so that the women could retain their own sovereign sexual energies and not be invaded by any other energies into their holy womb. So the clearer the womb, the more successful they could be at self-conceiving. The process involved working with interdimensional angelic forces in communication with them. And then there is a process that I discerned that Mary got involved with, which was depicted symbolically as weaving or spinning, that's what she was doing at the time of her conception. But what I think this is describing is the quantum level physics that she was engaged in, working with the light matter interface, maybe her DNA, her eggs, and so forth. Those are some of the processes. And so you can imagine that this would be a training that is started from the time the child can walk. And usually for the highest level adepts, it's accomplished during adolescence, maidenhood. But for some of the women, they were not able to accomplish this until much later, like Mary's mother, Anne, like Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, like Sarah, the mother of the biblical Isaac. All of these stories are stories about miraculous conceptions, and everyone's just like, oh, isn't that nice? God took pity on a poor barren woman. And what I say is like, wow, no. This is talking about a priestess practice that some of these women had to wait their whole lives to be able to do.
And now, would you suppose the purpose overall with some of these divine conceptions, as opposed to having a child with a man, is it to generate maybe like a more pure soul to come into existence?
That's right.
Something along these lines?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, a higher vibrational, more high intelligent star being.
All right. And then go ahead.
And there is a role for the high tantric sacred marriage, so process of divine conception. So it could be virgin birth, or it could be divine conception with couple. Of course, all of that got hijacked, but high tantra is what you find in like ancient Sumer and ancient, Mesopotamia and so forth. So you also, there are hints of this between Mary Magdalene and Jesus. And so that's what I'm looking at in my new course, for example, which I'm calling the 7 Mysteries of Magdalene at my 7 Sisters Mystery School. site, which is starting February 21st, 2023. So for your viewers and listeners, they might be interested. It will remain available in replay. But you know, I'm looking at, okay, what did the sacred marriage, what were the components of the sacred marriage in order to engender a very high vibrational soul between two sacred priestess individuals?
Yeah. What are some of your thoughts on, I don't know if you've spoken to any, traditional Christian individuals or Judeo-Christian individuals. I wonder kind of how do you feel this information is coming across to some of these traditional ways of viewing history and the whole idea of the divine birth? And I wonder if there's any feedback that you've gotten or kind of how you think about that.
Right. You know, the little shreds that I've gotten of people who are very much in the dogmatic views is that this is blasphemy.
The usual.
Which is so bizarre because it's just basically an explanation of what they believe in. You know what I mean? For thinking people. But because the level of programming and the veil that has gone over it is so thick, they are willing and complicit in their own blindness about this. And it's not medicine for them. It's medicine for the people who are always wondered what exactly this is all about, or once they hear the information say, oh my gosh, that explains it, right? So it's mainly serving those people who are interested in mystical Christianity anyway, you know, or the esoteric underpinnings that we wouldn't even call Christianity, but that are, you know, what Jesus was about, what Mary Magdalene was about, what Mother Mary was about. Because they were not all tied into the Christian program. You know, they were doing their thing, kind of Gnostic-y people, you know, like non-conventional Essene type of Jews, you know, at the time. And then it just became calcified 400 years later into doctrine that then became called Christianity.
Yeah.
But what I'm talking about is stuff that was floating around the ancient world well before Christianity was even, you know, a spark in the eye of the Christian fathers.
Yeah. And how complicated do you feel that this would be to achieve if a woman was to attempt this practice in modern times? Do you feel that this is achievable? Is this something that is still doable? Would it require a specific knowledge set? I'm curious about that.
Yes, I think it would be doable, but it requires a specific knowledge set, a specific spiritual advancement, and ideally a specific amount of spiritual integrity. What I was shown is that when I started, you know, when I first wrote and published my dissertation in 2007, and then it became my first two books in 2009 and 10, that it would be at least 3 generations before all the information and codes were, and understandings and integrity levels and openings were there in order to actually accomplish it as it was intended to be. Now, there have been women who have experienced divine conception. One woman that we know of didn't plan on it or know what was happening. She just conceived on Christmas Eve, 1974. Her name, the pseudonym that we're using for her is Lori. And Den Poitras writes about this extensively. He knew her in his book, Parthenogenesis, women's long lost ability to self-conceive. There are two other women I know. One is a Hindu holy woman, and then another one is a woman who lives and had this experience in Mexico. She's not Mexican herself. But the children of her and Lori died, one at 3 months, the other one at 3 years. So it's like the doors are not quite open for these children to fully be able to thrive and make it on the planet. We need much more in the way of support for these children. Groups, that's what Mother Mary had. She had groups around her, and that's what I see in the ancient Greek tradition. There was a group of priestesses protecting the woman and so forth, supporting her and the child, even raising the child.
And this word parthenogenesis, is this the word? Does that essentially mean, like, does that divine conception? Is that what that means?
Yeah, it's the scientific term for conception without male sperm.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from parthenos and gignesthai, two Greek words. Parthenos meaning virgin or maiden, and gignesthai, to be born. So to be born of a virgin or maiden. Scientifically, and there are instances of parthenogenesis that periodically happen in the natural world that have been induced scientifically through experimentation and so forth. But, you know, spiritual parthenogenesis would have been another order altogether from beyond scientific experimentation.
So you briefly mentioned earlier, but I wanted to ask you a little bit more, because you received an honorable mention for the Scholar Award via your paper on the cult of Demeter and Persephone. I was wondering if maybe you could touch a little bit more on that paper and a little bit details about what it covered.
So that was my exploration into the mother grain goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone, who's the goddess of the spring and also the underworld, how they get separated out, Persephone gets raped, and so forth. What I contend, and I don't write about that in the paper because I hadn't researched divine birth yet, but Persephone is interrupted in her divine conception practice by Zeus. She's raped. Whereas my understanding is that Demeter, in the original timeline of the story, is able to parthenogenetically conceive Persephone. So that paper, though, focuses on my research of this religion, this veneration of these goddesses in Sicily, how it wasn't just in Greece that this was happening, but there was a site, a portal at the center of Sicily, known as the Rock of Ceres Rock, where this veneration was taking place. So that it was looking at how that, how those goddesses were named, venerated, and the sacred sites to them. It was not only a sacred mountain, that Rock of Ceres, but there was the lake Pergusa that was supposedly the portal of the underworld by which Persephone got taken down. So I look at that in that article, and that was part of my master's thesis. It was extracted from my master's thesis at the California Institute of Integral Studies, whereas my dissertation, became my books on divine birth.
Okay.
So I was moving in this direction, and then, there are connections between Demeter and Mother Mary, a very deeply felt sense in Italy and Sicily, that Demeter basically morphed into Mother Mary as Christianity took over and laid Mother Mary over that. But they always held Mary kind of in their own way, in more like a mother goddess kind of way in Sicily and Italy, at least at the folk level.
I have a note here to ask you. Who was Mary of Perogita?
Oh, Mary Parogita. Mary Parogita. Well, what I've discovered in the new book that I'm writing about Mary is that Mary Parogita was Mother Mary's sister, born of her mother Anne, but not through parthenogenesis the way Mother Mary was, but through Anne's relationship with a man. And the reason why they're both called Mary is because that was more of a priestess title than it was a proper name. And what it meant was priestess of divine love and womb mastery and wisdom. That's what I am uncovering and talking about. So this is how you could have two Marys in one family. And that's a mystery for us to explore because, you know, we don't really hear in Christian church anything much about Mary, let alone that she had a sister and what that might have been all about.
Yeah, with
that
Mary,
you more see in the Gnostic.
yeah, with Mary Magdalene, one thing I think is funny is kind of like the common idea of Mary as a prostitute. It seems to be like a total psyop, or it doesn't really seem like there's a real foundation for that claim. I think it's often confused with the woman who was a sinner in the Gospel of Luke. But yeah, I'm curious of any of your thoughts around that.
Right. So Sky, this is a bit about what I'm going to be investigating in the Seven Mysteries of Magdalene course. One of the mysteries is the mystery of sacred marriage. And there is evidence that I find through combining the canonical Gospels and the Gnostic Gospels, particularly Philip, along with the background that I know about this part of the world and how these priestesses worked, and that there were virgin sex servant priestesses, the case can be made that Magdalene was one of those, a virgin sex servant priestess, or what later came to be known as a prostitute or harlot or something like that. And that, okay, so, you know, these are the details that I'm going to be looking at. And then what does this mean for us today? It's not about like having our jollies looking at history, but it's like, well, how does that open up things for us as men and women in this day and age, if we understand that? And what does that mean for our own sexuality, for our own partnering, you know, that kind of thing. So that's one of the things I'm exploring about Mary Magdalene, among other things.
I want to ask you, when someone like yourself, when you look at or read something like the New Testament, from, you know, having all this other knowledge and reading all of these other various, you know, maybe apocryphal or Gnostic texts, or all of these different histories of myth and all of it, I'm curious, what's your overall like perspective or some of your thoughts on the figure Jesus and Mary, and what they kind of represent or represented and stood for in reality? What would you say the most like important messages to take away from these things, in your opinion, would be?
These are high-level beings who, like all of us, have had their human lives and their off-human lives, their off-planet lives. They were and are particularly interested in helping the earth plane and humanity to awaken, get to a new rung of our spiritual spiral. Some call it ascending our souls, whatever. Be able to open our consciousness and throw off the shackles of the negative forces that have been on the planet. I think that's what they've been about. That's why they came here 2,000 years ago. That's why they're still operating on the astral plane. They're guardians of the earth plane and humanity. who are simply here to help us understand our own divinity within and how we can access that and really fully develop it to become the anthropos, what they called in the Gnostic sources, the fully divine human. Once again. And with that goes a whole bunch of emotional healing, because you can't get to 12 midnight ascended being without doing, the healing at 3 o'clock, 6:30, and 9 p.m. You can't do a spiritual bypass. You have to go through the healing levels of all of the trauma to get back to the self-love, which is the basis for all of that. Yeah, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within. So that's what that's getting at, that you have everything you need, and these beings are just here as masters to hold the mirror up to you and let you see that and figure out how to activate it.
Yeah, I also think he said something along the lines of, I don't know the exact words, but that many others will come after him and do greater things than himself, which is something that
That's
I think people often forget.
Yes. And we're in that process right now.
Yeah. Is there any additional last points or messages that you feel are important to touch on with all of this before we close out?
This material is part of a living mystery tradition that can feed your soul and lead to the fulfillment of what your greatest soul's desire is, which really is to feel that ecstatic oneness with the divine and to be walking around on earth in a state of pleasure. So that's why I've been writing what I've been writing, teaching what I've been teaching. I have, numerous courses to help people, processes to help people activate this within themselves, keep it going in the third dimensional workaday world. The Magdalene course is one. The Mystery Tradition of Miraculous Conception book is another. I have the Mother Mary mystery teachings and a Mary circle that I have monthly. So all of these things are my way of working out this material for myself and sharing it with others so that we can, move on with this clam bake here.
I like the terminology. What are some of the ways that people can find your books if they are interested in those? Where would you direct them? And then where would you direct them to find your mystery school and any social media, anything like that?
Yeah. Right. Well, starting with my mystery school, it's 7sistersmysteryschool.com. The 7 is written out, SEVEN. You'll find lots of resources if you go to that homepage, some of them free. You can find, these courses that I've been talking about and more. Links to my store where my books are listed. You can also just go straight to Amazon, me as an author, and find my 3 books there. And you can go to my YouTube channel and see more of the interviews that I've done and conversations that I've had that are just freely available to spark your interest.
Well, thank you. This was fascinating. I'm sure many people may think that some of this stuff is a little crazy, but many will also resonate and probably gravitate towards these things. So I really appreciate you, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Sky. I appreciate you and your time.